the groups. And since the recording is now back in progress, I'm going to re-say that. Welcome back. We just came out of the breakouts for the first topic, and we are now going to go over into hearing about the different conversations that were in each of the different rooms. I also am excited to hear about some of these conversations. So let's kick it off. Who do we want to call on first? Let's call on Mary. We'll have Mary's group go first.
Let's go. All right. So we had a really good talk. It was a great group of people. A few notes I wrote down were, we talked about the power of boosting on social platforms. Do not sleep on boosting. It's really important and really effective. We also talked about identifying influencers that fit your ICP's interests. So where are your customers looking? What do they pay attention to? Who are they following? And how can you leverage that? Brand values, aligning with influencers, and how to handle situations where that may go astray. And then brand awareness, and you have to have an impression to create an action.
Very good. Very, very good. Jeremy, what about your group?
Yeah, it was a great discussion. I had a lot of fun. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
We had a lot of good stuff. We had a lot of do's, find influencers who align with your brand and your values, especially. That's going to make it a lot easier once you start talking to them about, what to do and what not to do, because we talked a lot about, you don't want to give an influencer too much direction because they're the ones who are experts with their audience, but you also want to make sure they don't make any really big mistakes with your brand. We talked about, get further on that, doing your research and really making sure that, who this influencer is. Jeff at Rocket Barn had a really good point. He talked about the fact that you should look for engagement over followers. Engagement is really what you want. Followers, those numbers could be, really big or really small, but it's really about the engagement. We talked about micro influencers a lot, local college athletes, local radio personalities, things like that. We talked about we had a really good discussion around your own company and looking within your company, like your CEO. If your CEO can be an influencer of your own brand. That probably doesn't fall in the strict definition of influencer, but I'm a Sport Clips franchisee, and I think of Gordon Logan as a huge influencer for Sport Clips. Who doesn't know Gordon? There was an example of I think it was Shuck and Shack, an oyster bar franchise, where the CEO had become an influencer. And then we also talked about franchisees. Is there a way to see if there are franchisees who could also be influencers and what you could do? We talked about having a plan in place if something goes wrong. We talked about having a plan in place for whether you're going to use ad fund for this or not. And we talked about the only don't I recall is, again, from Jeff, don't surprise your franchisees. Make sure they know this is happening. You certainly don't want a influencer showing up to your location and your franchisees not aware of it.
Very, very good stuff. I actually was trying to take some notes. I'm going to have to go back and take a couple of other notes. Let's go over to Sherry. We'll go to Sherry Fishman's group.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Yes, we had a really great crowd within our group, a ton of franchisors asking questions, and we had a nice conversation. I have to say, we focused on, for the most part, we focused on how important it was to educate your influencers and to have a way to educate the influencers, making sure that they truly were influencing from the right narrative, as someone pointed out, that it was depicting your brand in the right way. And Lindsay, who from our group was formerly from the influencer world, told us about there are several different companies that you can work with that actually help the influencer understand what your product is. It's called, one that she mentioned was called Expert Voice. Important to know that, because if you're working with an influencer, you're getting them excited. Then you want it to depict your brand correctly. And if they want swag, if they're going to have something big out of it, then you want to make sure that they're accurate. The other thing to remember, and very important, is tracking. If you're going to be doing these influencer programs, to have a tracking within that contest to make sure that you know that it's working. Everything that we do in our world, right, is reporting and tracking and understanding, because we have to report to those that that we work for, that signs our paycheck, or that that does contribute to their ad fund. If our ad fund is actually supporting it, that it's going to work, right? So we have to have the reporting side of it. It's very important. And within that same thought process, starting small and getting them excited about it, perhaps using what we talked about, grand openings in new market entries, as a great opportunity. It's a way to get others excited about influencer marketing, to have them understand it, to feel it, that lines are out the door, that look at their same store sales, compared to others, from month 1 versus month 1, month 2, month 3 versus other new market entries of franchisees. So, I mean, it's a great way to cast a really great persona on influencer marketing and give it a good name. And then from there, I'd say just make sure that you align. Make sure that you align and understand who's paying for it. With franchisees, if franchisees are involved in these programs, which they are, and they're excited about it, understanding what an influencer does and doesn't do. So it's not just education for the influencers, education to the franchisee and what they're getting themselves into. And I think it was Jeff who said that, setting expectations for them. So important. It'll be a nightmare for whoever's responsible for the influencer marketing. And I know that because we do that. So make sure you're very careful.
That's excellent. It actually ties into several of those items, tie into what our group discussed. I will share some of the other things, but just kind of in the tool that you mentioned on managing the voice, our group actually kind of brought up the good and the bad about like just some experiences. And these are just real things. It's not all fuzzy. So there are operational issues when managing. And so I think managing the voice, setting expectations, those are very important. One thing that our group talked about is how important it is to have clarity in the contract, even on small activations, right? And so our group kind of discussed some of those things. One of the things that Jeff, I think it was Jeff at Rocket Barn, had mentioned was that engagement is a really important metric. Our group also said the same thing, is that it's also, even when you have call to action, where we had one example in our group where it was at a previous company, but it was at Gold's Gym, and they had like a best friends day. And so you can basically give your best friend a free membership for a month and a swag bag. And so one of the ancillary benefits is people are tagging, and it's not just about the direct specific call to action, but that prioritizing engagement, because that matters. Our group also, Sherry, as you mentioned in your group, our group talked about the importance to really know what you're tracking. I'm trying to find my notes here. I wrote down a couple of notes on that. But basically, just the importance to have unique identifiers to measure traffic. That you could go as far as even to having landing pages, but there's a whole slew of things that you want to think through just to make sure that you're able to report back, as Sherry mentioned. We had a question in our group that was, a couple of things that I would actually make a comment on, and I would pose it back to the group. I think we have a little bit of extra time, so we may be able, if anyone wanted to chime back in. One of the things was basically, hey, I have a limited budget. Should I spread that across a bunch of kind of smaller, if you call that micro influencers, or should I go after one bigger name because I have an agency partner that's recommending that we go with this bigger name? Is that the right thing to do? And there's often mixed feedback. I think that in our group thought that really first starts with what's your goal. And so, we really kind of got into that, what our group's general kind of group think was, and not even group think in a bad way, but what surfaced to the top was that basically in that circumstance that they would err towards more of the micro content. And then obviously all of the other groups' feedback on, alignment and values and all that's really important. Last thing we discussed, how to go find the influencers. And so one of the remarks is that, hey, I trust my PR agency and they do it for me, which is perfect. And the PR agency will help go manage that. And another couple of responses were hashtags, which is basically just get down in the weeds of literally yourself going to look and just go find people. And they don't have to be a part of an influencer network to reach out to them. And that is some manual work, but you can do that. You want to do that manual work to have a finger on the pulse of what exactly it is that you're looking for. Another resource that was mentioned, influence.com, to find local influencers. Again, one of the challenges there was kind of what the other groups mentioned, which is, from a budget perspective, like franchisor is helping locate these, but it's on the franchisees to actually pay for it and implement it. And so what the other groups mention are super important, but influence.co was a resource put up. Last thing I'll say, and this is just a question to pose, it doesn't necessarily have to be answered, but I'm curious if any other groups had any success in using influencers for franchise development. Our group had none. Our group had some opinions, but was just curious if anyone has. Maybe you can drop that in the chat as we go into some of the next sessions. And I believe that I was the last person, so we're going to go ahead and go into the second topic. Marcella, are we doing good on time?
Yes, the second round will be 25 minutes, so we get some more time in the end to discuss, but we're ready to go if everybody's ready.
Okay, so we are going to jump, since I probably talked too much and we cut off some time, we're going to jump straight into this next topic. The topic is diversifying your media mix. Obviously, there are ever increasing channels that you can do paid media on, organic and paid, but the big three are typically Google, Facebook, Amazon, as it relates to kind of the digital channels. There, some of the things that come to mind when I'm thinking about expanding and diversifying, there's a lot of questions around TikTok, connected TV, different types of native display, streaming audio, etc. But I'm going to go ahead and kick it out to the groups, and we're going to have a discussion on diversifying your media mix, and we will meet back here in 24 minutes.
See, a couple people are still joining. Okay, Ryan, I think you're good to go.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We have 8 minutes, so we're gonna hustle straight to it. Let's kick it out to have Mary. I guess we'll have you go first again, and we'll have you share what your group discussed.
It's an honor. Thank you. So we were talking about the hallowed TikTok, kind of just, I know it's a big thing. Do we understand it? Does anyone use it? What is kind of going on with them? And someone really perfectly described it as being in an awkward teenager phase, figuring out what it wants to do, especially the way they have their advertising set up. We talked about not wanting to buy platforms, but wanting to buy audiences, really figuring out what the customer online life is like. Where are they looking for their advice? Where are they going? How can you get your ads placed there? And the importance of running media for a while before seeing a result, and really understanding the local impact and figuring out where your spend should be based on the local impact for sure. And yeah, those are just a few tidbits. I won't take up too much time.
Very good stuff. Jeremy, we'll kick it over to your group.
Okay, so I like this because we're switching over to the other side of the spectrum. We kept coming back to grassroots. So an interesting topic, but we had a lot of franchisors on the call, and I think 3 or 4 just came back to grassroots, which I love, right? Because I mean, franchise is all about power in the numbers, boots on the ground locally. So we had a lot of really good discussion and talk around what does grassroots look like, right? Getting involved in the community, getting involved in local schools, sorry about that, car dealerships, using social at the local level, doing fundraising at the local level, sponsoring, sports events, things like that. So I just love that because that kind of balances out this incredibly heavy tech digital conversation that you are bound to have when you're talking about media. So I love that. I also love the fact that Kathy with Duck Donuts talked about the fact that in her space, budgets, really need to focus on ROI, and for her, traditional media, it tends to be expensive. So she kind of focuses more on digital because you can track that better, and you can focus in on the ROI. I also liked, bear with me here, I have to go through my notes here. But somebody was talking about the fact that in their space, they have some really big competitors. There's kind of a huge gap between some smaller companies and some really big ones, right? And that also kind of led us back to this conversation of grassroots, because if you're going up against an 800-pound gorilla in your space, they are going to tend to own the digital, and right, and that's gonna force you over to again that local. The other thing I liked is, when we're talking about marketing in general, there's really 3, huge areas. Now, of course, there's consumer, of course, there's Fran Dev, but there's staffing now, which is a huge deal, right? I mean, I'm a Sport Clips franchisee, and, hair salons really got beat up pretty bad. And we had 2 other franchisors on the call who also, recruiting is so huge right now for everything from technicians to stylists, that we actually talked a lot about all this marketing and media mix around finding staff, which is a big deal, I know, for probably a lot of folks on this call.
Yeah. A lot of clients of mine are taking budget and obviously putting it towards solving those problems. I'll let Sherry go first, and then I will actually I'll go first, and then I'll let Sherry go after. Our group actually kind of had the same tact. We did discuss kind of the general topic as I maybe have kind of framed it up in terms of diversifying the media mix, and so we discussed some new programmatic campaigns launching. We discussed YouTube. One group was kind of exploring YouTube and saw some really good opportunities. And then another, kind of from a past life, said YouTube was my #1 most successful channel. I think YouTube pre-roll specifically. I also believe that there's a lot of opportunities there, but search, social for remarketing specifically. There was an idea that was brought up by Karen. If anyone's like, I'm personally going to connect with her. I'm also a franchisee, and I was super interested, so I'm going to connect with Karen. But she was talking about connected mail, which is a super interesting idea, which is mail with kind of a digital component as well. Maybe I should have known about that, but I actually have never myself run a campaign like that. So as an interested franchisee, as well as supplier, but franchisee, I'm looking into that. I found that super interesting. But what our group did get into was that basically old school still works. Carissa was sharing a lot of kind of focus that she's had a lot of success with in her brand. And then there, another member of the group mentioned it as the ground game, right? But basically the basics, obviously Google search is super important, but everything from magnets, like, I don't know if it's car magnets, but signs, like yard signs, different things like that. A Google reviews contest where you're giving franchisees for the market that has the best, increase in Google reviews, that, they get a gift card and they're going to buy the whole team lunch. Just some ideas like that. I think they were increased in 2 months. They had a 10% increase in reviews, which is phenomenal. And so our group also, Jeremy, kind of went back to, hey, it's not just new media that matters. It's really the old ways of getting in front of people, staying in front of people, that still works. The last thing that was brought up was targeted PR. And having that said, let me kick it to Sherry. So I give her group some time. Go ahead, Sherry.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. I have to say that I asked for help because I'm obviously focused so much on the PR and the earned side. So I was looking for assistance on the paid side. And we did focus on new ways, but we also really from the start focused on what traditionally has been working. And we heard about really looking at from the franchisor side and the franchisee side, what is recommended. And it is looking at what is traditionally worked. So we're still not breaking away completely from what has worked in the traditional ways of the media mix. But I'd say that the focus was, we kind of talked about actually podcast, Ryan Hicks. We talked about podcasts and we talked about adding that as a mix, something that because I talked about it from a PR side, that not only influencers, but podcasts are a huge part of what we do on the earned side, but who is doing it, who is adding that to the media mix. And so that was a nugget that I didn't even know that there were those brands that are actually adding some sponsorship money to podcasts that really helps. So it's something to consider. Also adding and suggesting to franchisees as if they have money in their budget at when they look at their media calculator, to add more support for those local markets for that impact side of your marketing focus. That was just something else that was quite prevalent as far as a push. To not forget about that. So it goes back to, so I guess we're pretty consistent talking about grassroots and not forgetting about the importance of that, and how it will always remain a big influencer and a big game changer for us. So I think it's important too that everybody who isn't going or has not considered going to the franchise customer experience conference, that they do consider it. And there is a link within the chat. And I know that Marcella will also send that to everybody who did join us today. And Ryan, did you have anything else to add?
Nothing else to add. I look forward to seeing everybody next week in Atlanta, and we will send out information on the next virtual workshop. Do we already know the date or no?
Yes, it's August 24th. I just put it in the chat too.
Perfect. That is my sister's birthday. So we'll sing happy birthday to my sister. We'll see
Okay.
everybody hopefully next week in Atlanta, and then in August.
Thank
That's
you.
it.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Everybody, have
This
a
was
great rest
great.
of the day. Take care.
Take care.
Bye,
Thanks
guys.
for a great combo. Bye-bye.